December 7th, I believe, 2022, installment, as David likes to call it, David Fenley of the TAAC committee. So Allison.
Where is he?
Can we do a roll call? This kid's sick.
Oh.
Okay.
Gary Sheldon, representing precinct G. And you go next.
All right, I'm Phil Sterner, representing the Metropolitan Council.
Jeff Danes, Precinct D.
Diane Graham-Rath, Trellis, the Area Agency on Aging.
Patty Thorson, Trellis, the Area Agency on Aging.
Allison Edmond.
And then to my left,
What about you?
Andy Streisig, Metro Mobility.
Trellis.
Patsy Murphy, representing Precinct C.
Richard Rowan, AARP.
Heidi Meyer, Minnesota CCD.
Claudia Fugly, MNCCD.
Eric Henriksen, MCD.
Chris Bates, Precinct B. I got 5 places.
good. And we'll go to online.
Hi, Ken Rodgers. I don't remember what region. I think D.
Thank you. By the way, I forgot to tell you, he was gonna be a few minutes late. Awesome. And Sam was excused, I believe.
No, she's supposed to be in Brooklyn.
Okay. Is he going to introduce himself?
No, yeah, no,
We
she's
should-
excused.
I just got a message from her, we should excuse her.
Yeah, she is excused.
And then I see Doug online as well. And Guthrie. Okay, and then,
I got one more person.
You already did it.
Oh, he did?
and then myself, Darrell Paulsen, representing, Region F, I believe, and I'm the vice chair, and I'm also, acting as chair in for David Fenley from the State Council on Disability. And with that, I need an approval of, the minutes
So moved.
from November, it should be
Second.
second.
I move it, Darrell.
Thank you.
Patsy is.
Just a second. Is there any discussion, any additions, any deletions, corrections?
You just moved for the agenda, the minutes, did you do the agenda?
Oh, I thought I did the minutes. Did I?
Did you do, he did the minutes.
I was working the minutes. I haven't moved the agenda yet. So I have no discussion on the minutes from November 2nd, you said, right? Then having no discussion, seeing no other discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All abstain, say abstain. Motion carries. So the agenda for today, is printed. I need a motion to approve it. Is there any additions, any, deletions, or would anybody like to move anything around? And if so, there's your time to make that motion. Otherwise, I need approval to approve our agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
And then all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great. And then we got, business information items. Expansion of identification disability and ability transit services with Eric Lind. He's the manager research analyst for Metro Transit. Thank you, Eric.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay? And committee members, thanks for letting me join you again. I've presented before this committee before, and coming back to talk about a topic that we've worked with you all on, and I'm kind of coming back with a first report of our expanded language when we're doing surveys around how people identify themselves when it comes to disability. So next slide. The brief outline here, and I wanted to emphasize that you should feel free to interrupt me at any point, and ask questions if you have them. Otherwise, we can certainly have a discussion at the end. So there are essentially 4 things I'm going to walk through. One is just to remind you of our really major survey that's going on board transit right now, the travel behavior inventory. Talk a little bit about how we were motivated to improve the way we're asking about disabilities in transit surveys. And then walk through the question that we're using now, and we've used it a few times. And so I want to talk about our initial results and what to make of them and how we can improve going forward. So next slide, please. And I apologize for not having spelled this out, but TBI, the Travel Behavior Inventory, is a Met Council research product where we want to understand how people are moving about the region. And there are a couple different aspects to this program. One of them that I'm most interested in as a Metro Transit employee is the onboard survey. So throughout 2022, we have been sending out interviewers to randomly encounter people and ask them about their trips on board transit. That surveying is almost complete, and we're expecting a full data set to be delivered early in 2023, and that will include not just Metro Transit, but all providers of fixed route service, including the suburban providers, the University of Minnesota. So that's exciting data for us, obviously, to understand who's on board and to update our information. My colleague Ashley from Met Council MTS presented to you in July in the summertime about kind of the pilot data that we got back from this survey. And at the next slide, I'm just going to show a reminder of what, thank you. Some of what that said. We were looking at a selection of routes, not the whole system, but you might remember Ashley describing this as kind of retention of trips. And basically, what we saw is that when we look at people who answered this really, binary yes/no version of the question, do you consider yourself to have a disability? We saw much greater retention of trips from people who identified as having a disability, said yes to that question, than not. And the way we interpreted this is, just thinking about people who are using Metro or transit services for their mobility, are still riding transit in 2021 in this case, while people who did not identify as having a disability are riding transit much less. And so overall, we saw this increase on these routes going from 11%, which is close to what it was system-wide in 2016, 10%, up to 18%. So a significant increase in the proportion of people identifying as having a disability on board fixed route transit. So this, the motivation for why I'm here to talk to you about our expanded version is that I think we all can recognize that, asking, do you consider yourself to have a disability, while it can be informative, doesn't really capture the full, identity, experience, perspective that is out there when it comes to understanding this issue, and especially how people with different types of disabilities interact with transit. And so that was what we wanted to do. And so that, motivated a conversation that we had a year ago with this committee and myself online about how to do that. So we can go forward one slide, please. And what we sort of wanted to do was recognize these multiple dimensions of ability and disability, of course, and specifically what barriers or challenges are there to using fixed route transit based on the different disabilities that people have. And we especially wanted to be able to record, multiple identities, which is important in many different aspects. We ask people about race, ethnicity. We want them to be able to identify, themselves by selecting multiple responses. The same thing should be true for understanding ability, disability. And then I think a really important one was understanding temporary disability, and one of the key I guess, motivators of understanding these challenges is that they are universal, and almost everyone will experience some type of disability in their lifetime, if not many times. So understanding kind of like how people are in that temporary category is important too. Next. Okay, this is too small to read, so I'm going to read it. I have a picture of this document that was shared a year ago, but this is meant to justify and sort of document the revised question we're using. So this question in this form has been incorporated into our standard sort of demographic panel. So as I mentioned, we asked about race, ethnicity, we ask about age, we ask about household income. Sometimes we ask about whether someone is a student or employed. But we always include this question now at Metro Transit in our surveys. So the question reads, how do you describe your disability ability status? We are interested in this identification regardless of whether you identify as being disabled. Your answers help Metro Transit make its services more universally accessible. Select all that apply. And you know, the choices here are again meant to reflect particular ways that someone will experience fixed route transit and the challenges that kind of are inherent in that. So the choices include, and again, people can mark more than one, a vision impairment, a hearing impairment, a learning disability, for instance, ADHD, dyslexia, a developmental disability, a mobility impairment, a mental health disability, a temporary impairment due to illness or injury, for instance, a broken ankle or surgery, a disability not listed above, and then we ask people to please share what that is, or finally, I do not identify as having a disability or impairment. And so hopefully this reflects what you remember about our conversation, and certainly at the end or you know, as this discussion goes on, we can have feedback on how you think this is capturing the full dimensions of ability and disability, but this is what we've been using. So next slide. So we took this expanded language and we've implemented it now in 4 different survey efforts. Part of my job is to help kind of consult on the survey methods and analysis for a lot of different projects we do. So this is just an example of how we've tried to implement it across different types of research. The first one last spring was looking at Route 22, which has undergone what we call the Better Bus Route program, so upgrading the bus in terms of looking at timings and looking at stop placements and so forth. So we asked about it there. We had a survey last fall, or this fall, I guess, about North Star riders in particular. So there's obviously a lot going on with office commuting and whether North Star is ridership should be expected to, you know, grow. Some of you may have heard that we were testing out 2-car rather than 3-car trains on the light rail. That happened late this summer. There was a lot of interest in those experiences, so we had a pretty well, a pretty good survey in terms of participation, and we asked it in that survey. And then lastly, we did an that survey. We also included this revised question. So what I want to do is just go through some of the responses from this expanded. For all of them, responsibility. Interesting. Go through that was and we started question. 30. Just a eight. The did choice again. Okay, back to the light rail. So we had over 1,000 people respond to this. It was a very hot topic among our riders, so I think we got really good participation. Excuse me. But we saw around a third of people identifying one or more disabilities. Again, a mobility impairment or a mental health, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong slide. Yeah, so mental health disability was, again, one of the most common, but interesting, a vision impairment was also very common in people responding to this light rail survey. Okay, finally, next slide. So the most recent survey was a customer satisfaction survey. This was an online survey. It included a lot of people who are maybe not riding at the moment because it was different than the other surveys in terms of, you know, not encountering people on board, but nonetheless, it included people who have been our customers, whether they are currently or not. You know, over 1,400 responses. And again, around a quarter identified as having a disability, a mental health disability, and a mobility impairment were the two most common choices, with vision impairment not far behind. Okay. So of these 4 surveys, you know, we're seeing, number one, more people finding themselves in this question as having something that we might consider part of, you know, what we have to address at Metro Transit in terms of serving people with disabilities. And the other thing is it's giving us good information about what types of disabilities we really need to be focused on, and that they differ across these different surveys because there's different groups of riders out there. So North Star may be different than light rail, than local bus, which of course we know, but this is a way to give us some really actionable information on it. Is there a question?
Go ahead.
Chair, members of the committee, I just wanted to point out, first of all, that, you know, I think this is awesome, and I think it'll serve the disability community well. When I'm looking at the categories, I think that what is conspicuous in its absence is folks with a neurological disability or a TBI.
Yep, and I was wondering if you'd bring that up. Oh, thank you for
And
noticing that. So.
I think it's particularly important because sometimes, depending on how, you know, connected with the TBI community somebody might be, it is a disability where, you know, someone might be inclined to not think of it as a disability. You know, they may answer no and think of it as an injury to the, you know, do you have a disability question. So it may be a group of folks that is not captured in this yet.
And I have a question, Ken.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, so Eric, I want to build on a little bit from what Andy's kind of began. There's a bit of an issue right from the get-go that makes me kind of question, or at least categorize some of the information that you're receiving is not as robust as you may think it is. For example, you use the term hearing impairment, and people that are deaf do not consider their deafness as an impairment. So, and you wouldn't know that. I mean, it seems relevant to call it a hearing impairment, but they consider that not an impairment. So that would definitely influence the kind of response you would get from a hearing impaired individual or from someone with a hearing loss. So to that point, disability means something different to every one of us. It means you interpret it one way, I interpret it a different way. And I might suggest that, and I don't know if this is a possibility at this point since this survey has been out for quite a while, but instead of referring to vision impairment, hearing impairment, specific impairments, or seeing disability as an impairment, I might classify them more generally. And in the ADA world, we call that a functional limitation. So we classify by definition under the ADA a disability as someone who has a functional limitation in one or more area. Do you have trouble walking, seeing, lifting, carrying, bending, seeing, hearing, sleeping, thinking, concentrating? Those are the functional abilities that someone would easily more respond to, that could be categorized as a disability and a specific kind of disability secondarily, but that would give you more of a valid response from people, I think, than calling it an impairment. So I just wanted to make that comment, that I think this really is going to impact what kind of data you receive, because it's based on what somebody's going to interpret as a disability. And a lot of people don't necessarily equate a sleeping issue or a functional limitation of sleeping or concentrating as having a disability by definition. So I think that might be helpful as you kind of explore further.
It's a great comment. Thank you. I'll say one of the reasons I'm here today is to continue improving on this practice. This is going to be evolving as all of our practices are. So definitely appreciate the suggestion about the functional limitations, and see if that might be a revision we can make.
Can I say something?
Go ahead. Heidi, go ahead. Thank you, Eric.
This is Heidi. With both of them, they are correct. And also I was thinking about learning disability because I have a learning disability and a processing problem. So I don't want them to think, oh, it's only because I have, because when I wear glasses and I say I need help reading, they say, oh, do you need it bigger? Do you need, so I get stereotyped for my disability. So how do you write processing and learning disability? Because they kind of go together, because I have to process how to get from A to B. So I have to process from my house to the bus stop to getting to the Met Council, as an example, so I can be here at this meeting. So it's not just, the reading and writing and the math, because learning disability, that's what the definition, if you look it up, is very generic, but it doesn't say that the whole brain has malfunction, different types. So my disability might be different than the person down the line. And also with TBI, they might have some of those too, maybe because of the injury. So I don't know, because everyone sees it a little bit differently. And I don't want this, you're doing a really good job of capturing or trying to capture, but I don't want it to get so stereotyped that we can't see the real picture of what you're set out to do. Just something to think about, because I get stereotyped all the time. Oh, so it's because you're hearing impaired. No, it's my processing and my hearing. It's because of your eyes. No, it's because of this and that. So it's a combination of a bunch of different things. So think about that when you're trying to write it, so we're not stereotyping like you do with wheelchairs and walkers and crutches. And then I get grouped into the wrong category now to answer your question in the first place, which I'm willing to do. So something to think about. Thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
I like the survey, but I think for this, you know, you show roughly 25% have some identifiable disability. I guess for this committee, I would like to know what's their alternative if they don't have Metro Transit. Can we take that survey one step further and say, hey, if I can't get Metro Transit, what's my alternative? What am I using as an alternative?
Right.
Just a thought.
That's a
Chair,
good
committee
thought.
members, that's a great point. One of the, I think, main things that I'm trying to convey inside Metro Transit with this is to understand that point about who we're continuing to serve. There's a lot of debate going on about, you know, missing commuters and other, you know, types of ridership that hasn't, you know, quote unquote come back. I think emphasizing how many people and how many types of people are using Metro Transit right now to live their lives is really important to understand. For this particular survey, or this set of, you know, surveys, we're really focused on the transit experience rather than the kind of broader travel experience, but I think that's something that we should look at with the sort of travel behavior inventory widely as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Patsy, and then we'll come back to you, Heidi.
I know, pardon me, I know you had not gotten to your next slide, but there I actually noticed a lot of the things, a disability not listed above, and some of those things that actually we've talked about here.
Yeah. Can we go to
And-
that next slide, please? Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. And actually, I know for myself, I have had a traumatic brain injury, and if I had a whole bunch of words like that right now that we see on the screen here, that would throw me off and I would probably just skip it. So I actually kind of like what you had prior to it, where they were just a few words. And I understand what Ken is saying about maybe somebody who is visually impaired or hearing impaired may not connect with that if they're used to hearing, or what should I call it? Looking at it as being blind or deaf or whatever. So I'm not quite sure really how you could break it down to meet everybody's definition that they form. So I would have to say, I think I kind of like your prior one where you were much more concise in what you're asking.
Thanks. And Chair and committee member, I'm mostly including this for completeness and to kind of back to our discussion a few minutes ago, see what we're really missing. You know, did we have people identifying things that we didn't have sort of in that pick list? You do see some things that, in addition to the, you know, there's a post-concussion syndrome, back to that like sort of TBI discussion. I also see anxiety, you know, more of a social, you know, a social interaction type identity. So those are things that we could include. As I'm listening, I think, really appreciating relating it back to the functional challenges, especially because that's what we can do things about at Metro Transit. So if we did think of it as, you know, I have trouble with the following, or, you know, walking, seeing, hearing, you know, even, you know, following the directions of a app or whatever.
Yeah.
That might be a way to allow some detail but not overwhelm people, as you're suggesting.
And Eric, just for a point of reference, I'm not confined to a power wheelchair. I use a power wheelchair. I'm not confined to it.
I just gonna cut in quick here, I know Heidi is waiting, but correct me if I'm wrong, but is this just a list of what respondents
Yes.
put? Yeah, I think this is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
This is
so-
not- this is not. This is
Sorry,
not-
this wasn't clear. This is
not our language.
this is what people put in when we said
Okay.
a disability not listed above, please tell us what it is. And this is from those respondents across all different surveys of what they entered.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Go ahead, Heidi.
Okay, my question is, and this happened with medical transportation for the disability community at the legislature. You know, when they were in the hearing, not understanding all the different nuance, you know? So if you bring this to the legislators and you're looking for funding or help and you're talking about the disabled, you have to be really clear so they go, well, then they can use the tax or they can do this or they, and I actually did do this, and you're not supposed to, but I stood up and I said, they're different. The two don't mirror, because the mental health and people who don't have, or maybe do have it, use it differently, you know, the medical transportation. So they were like, well, we got all this, why are you asking these questions? So be very clear when you bring this to people and the legislators, so they don't get confused and start saying other things that have, you know, kind of get mixed up in, you know? I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but I just know that we got new people, new blood, and some blood are old, but they need some new training over at the Capitol. And if we need funding to get the disability community moving forward, we need to be very clear how it's being used and, you know, and good graphics and ideas and thoughts. So they can take what your survey and understand that maybe 300 or 1,000 people use the buses every year. And it's important we, you know, keep it going with the disability community.
Yeah.
And then you can get the proper funding, you know, and the help you need. Because I can see this getting all messed up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone online have any questions? Anyone else?
Darrell, who's the person online with phone number?
The phone number of 651-2 something, and then 35, I don't know whose phone number that is.
You can ask them.
Can, whoever has that phone number, can they identify themselves?
Looks like it's Doug who had said he needed to log in with his phone.
Oh, it's Doug. So you're logged in twice? All right. Great. Thank you, Doug.
We have one more.
I just,
Sure, go ahead.
I have one comment is that the open-ended question elicited answers from people who probably wouldn't necessarily say that, especially I'm thinking of the population that ARP represents. A lot of older folks do have trouble walking to the bus stop, so I think it's good to get these kinds of answers because it will give you a better picture of who uses it and who needs the services and the difficulties they face.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track as long as we connect that narrow divergent piece. I'm not the best to speak on that, so I was glad, Andy, that you brought that up because I know that's a big, I knew that was something we've been missing.
Yeah.
And it's something that, if you look everywhere else, they're talking about it. It's the big, it's
And
like
we
the
all kind of hit on
it's
it.
like the DEI work, and then you add the A to it, right? Right? And then everybody's like, what does that mean? Well, A stands for accessibility, right? So, okay. But thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions for him? Otherwise, we're gonna let him go.
Oh, I thought he had more to talk about.
Sure. Do you have another question for him?
Oh, no, I thought he asked us for questions. I
Oh,
didn't know he was
you have more slides?
There are a couple more slides.
Sure.
Oh, please.
Go ahead, please
They
continue.
are
Please continue.
mostly summary from what we've just been talking about. But, to summarize, a third to a half in some of these surveys of people are identifying as having a disability. So that is a big increase over what we had from any survey when we asked, do you consider yourself to have a disability? Yes, no.
Right.
And so as we've been talking about, I think it's just important to recognize that, within Metro Transit to understand what we need to do to make our service universally accessible The most common types being a mobility impairment and a mental health impairment, but also looking at that list, as we were talking about with TBI, there's a lot of invisible impairments, right, or challenges, or whatever we want to call them. So, that, again, just emphasizes that we have to design our service in a way that makes it usable for everybody.
So Eric, this is Chair Paulsen. As I look at this, and we can see that, we can identify that, right? Because now people they feel comfortable in talking about their limited mobility or their mental health impairments, right? So what does that signal to you guys? Does that signal that we need to increase the service or increase it at different times? Or do we need to expand it, or do we need to decrease it in certain sections and increase it over here? I mean, because we can't keep squeezing the balloon at both ends, right? Because eventually the air's gonna go out, right? Right, because where does, eventually you keep squeezing it, no air's gonna come. So, what does that signal to you? And on the timeline, as we continue to increase our fleet or change our fleet, because it's getting older, it's consistently getting older, what does that look like? How can we, as the representation of the disability community and the aging community, how can we play a role in that, and where do you see us partnering in that relationship?
Chair, thank you for the question. I think it should be motivational for us to double down on some of the really good things we've been doing in terms of improving accessibility at bus stops with, better bus stops program. The group at Metro Transit is doing a full inventory and identifying places where we need to improve the boarding environment and local, pedestrian connections. When it comes to the vehicles themselves, I think the newer vehicles have a little better spatial arrangement to accommodate lots of different riders with different needs. I think especially think about some of these cognitive issues. We need to improve our wayfinding, and that means not just like directions in a station, but also looking at how we describe our service, how we tell people about what's available, what they can get to, how soon the bus is going to come, all of these things. Improving that type of kind of micro communication about our service, I think would be something we could work on. And that, might, basically all these different barriers are barriers to everybody, right? Not understanding how do I use the bus is a barrier to people using transit. Not understanding how often this thing comes. Will I ever be able to get back again if I get on board? These are barriers to everybody.
I have one more question.
Heidi, go ahead.
My question is, the pandemic has recently, and on the news yesterday, they had about mental health and all the different types of disability problems or emotional problems, whatever. The pandemic had brought out a lot of different things, so it might change how a person rides the bus or even rides the bus or the train at all. And then think of people who are autism, including, don't just think just autism, but people who are sensitive to noise, because I didn't like in the beginning when the train came and it was very loud when it took the turns, it's a very squeaky sound and I couldn't stand it. I don't even like sometimes some of the people on the trains when they get kind of noisy and loud and rude, and disrespectful. So how do you work with those people that could really learn something valuable and put it into use? Don't just send them on a bus or a train training program, but how to deal with it, because you guys have to do your part as they do their part, as we do, like I do my part. with the sensitivity of certain sounds, and certain things. So we're working as a team, so it's not just like, oh, we fixed your problem and left you hanging, and you really didn't fix the problem, because you just want me out of your way, and you don't want to work with us anymore. So how do you become like a team together? Because the pandemic has opened up a whole bunch of different problems. And then you've got different types of disabilities that, and I know you can't hit every one of them and make it work, but there are some things you can try to work on.
I
Like
think
sound
it's important to
system.
know that, since the pandemic and things have been opening up increasingly since then.
No, I would think
Things are
more,
changing, yes, and we've not gotten back to the ridership numbers that we've expected. We have gotten back to some pre-pandemic numbers relating to, I think it's maybe some leisure back and forth activities, but we have not, as far as the consumer, the day-to-day ridership that consistently would drive our trains or drive our buses. We've not seen that at that level. But
what I was saying is the pandemic
we are
has
seeing
changed.
is that leisure travel is coming back in a number of different areas. I know we don't think about riding the bus for fun. I typically ride the bus for fun, but if I do that, I bring my family, and a lot of times, because my partner and I are both in wheelchairs, we often take up those two seats. So sometimes it's not so much fun if somebody else is on the bus, and we have to take separate buses, but, the reason I say that is because we constantly see that in the routes that we take, and that to me is a good sign, right? So back to this whole thing about what are we missing? What do we see when we look at this survey, right? It's not necessarily when I get to the bus stop, or when I get to the train stop, or when I get to the commuter bus stop, right? It's about my way there, and what does that look like, and how does that make me feel safe? Does it make me feel warm? Does it make me feel able to get to that actual bus stop or to that actual location? Because if I don't feel like I can even get to that, then whatever you've done on the platform or in that space is secondary, because that means we're only going to use it, when the weather's nice, or when somebody decides to shovel their sidewalk or shovel their way. At some point, we have to incentivize taking the bus, and we have to de-incentivize the convenience of the fact that we put the buses through the neighborhoods, or we put the buses through next to a trail. We have to start to realize that's where these things belong. That's where they have to live. In order to survive, they have to coexist with each other. We cannot just put a bus in an area and then not put no housing or nothing next to it, right? We cannot just put a bus down 61 and not understand that we're losing out on a huge population that would travel in different ways if you put it through the neighborhood. So once Metro Transit and Metro Council decides to start looking at the fact that we know that we have to do this, and then they start incentivizing neighborhoods to bring this in, there's the answer to,
and I was going back,
carbon pollution and all the emissions that we complain about with cars and the convenience of our automobiles. But that's just my little thing, sorry.
and I was going back to your questions, but the pandemic has brought out a bunch of so how do you answer the question that you're asking? Because what if you never had emotional problems, like, because I don't know how you're stating your emotional problems in your question, but if I never, I don't see a psychologist, I don't see a psychiatrist, I don't take medicine, but the pandemic brought it out, but I also take transportation, and you want me to answer the question, that brings up a whole different ball of wax of how I look at myself with my transportation, because you're making it sound like I had it for half my life, and maybe you didn't. Maybe the pandemic is what brought it out. And so are we talking about that when there's a big hoo-ha and overtakes the United States, the world, then do the questions become different than what they normally are? You know what I mean? Because now I have to look at my whole self in a whole different type of manner. And so if the pandemic is what did it, then your question is, yeah, I have emotional problems. Yeah, I have a hard time with this, or yeah, it brought out my learning disability more, or my disability keeps me from going places because of the pandemic, So are you asking those questions too? Because no one's talking about that, and and now we have to start talking about it, because it's part of the reality of it, and it made the news yesterday. And Darrell was right, and everyone else is right in their questions. It's just how do we get to the bottom of it? And then, if you need funding, making sure the legislators understand it and they're not confused and lost, all the way up to Washington, D.C.
Chair and committee members, I definitely hope that we can keep improving these questions to capture the right dimensions. I think we're not asking about, the length of time that these conditions have persisted or whether they're new or old, just whether, the goal here is to ask whether they are something that is important to understand when thinking about transit. And so we saw there were some, these social anxiety type answers to, something not listed, and that might be going along with kind of what you're suggesting, and it's certainly the social environment on board transit has changed a lot during COVID. And the first thing is there's a lot fewer people. And the second thing is there are times and places where it's become a lot less comfortable for people to be on board just because of the behavior issues that are manifesting themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's real. But we're obviously working on that. We're doing our best to try to solve that question. So just overall, I'd say, our goal is to keep improving this question set so that we can have people see themselves and identify themselves in the questions and then make it actionable for us so that we can improve the system overall.
I just don't want it to get too generic.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Eric, I really appreciate your explanation and your request to want to improve. That's always a good thing. One thing I just wanted to mention is, and this may be different than what the intention is of collecting the data you're collecting, but I just want to mention, because I haven't heard it mentioned, that if this data is being used to try to understand ridership and getting our numbers back to the pre-pandemic number levels, you're getting data from riders that are currently using the system, but there's a large segment of people that are still not using transportation for many, many different reasons. And I almost went, and I'll give you an example. I work for the state. We have not yet returned to the office on a consistent basis, and I'm just representative of one very large state agency. There are many state agencies that have not yet fully returned to the office, and thus there's no need to commute right now. So there's a large segment of people based on their employment needs that aren't using transit right now because they don't need to transportate somewhere. So I guess my point is, if you want to access information, there might need to be a secondary track of surveying individuals that are not riding transit, or you don't get them from transit, but maybe from other locations, different large companies that have not fully return back to work. I don't know how you would do that, but to really fully understand why people aren't returning, I think that really has to be part of the discussion. Not just analyzing why people are returning. For those of us that are transit dependent, we don't have an option. If we want to go from point A to point B, we have to use public transportation. Other people have choices, and that might be a different area that needs to be explored to kind of fully understand this bigger picture.
Chair and committee member, that's a great point. I am, thinking about who is not on board is really important. I just wanted to respond to the transit-dependent characterization, because I try actually not to use that at all in my own work and talking through our ridership, because nobody is really captive to our service. Nobody is dependent on it in terms of because when we think that way, we end up having, we don't give the due respect, I think, to the service that we're providing when we say that people are going to be there no matter what, is my perspective on that. So I think it's important to think that we want to develop a service that is attractive to everybody and people want to use it, regardless of what their options are.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
A quick question for you, Eric. How long has these surveys been going on for? Or how many years, or when did it start?
So these examples I brought today are all kind of smaller efforts that we've been doing for many years and many different topics. The customer survey that we did in the fall has been done, before COVID was done every 2 years, going back decades. The travel behavior inventory that I mentioned at the very beginning has been going on for decades, also about every 5 years. So there is a long history of data and some of these things. Now, the questions haven't always been the same.
That's kind of, I guess, where I was coming from, is how long have the inquiries about who identifies having a disability, how long have those been incorporated into these surveys and data that you've been collecting?
I don't know how long the question about do you identify as having a disability, yes or no, I don't know how long that has been going on, but certainly more than 5 years.
Because the question, I guess, kind of stemmed to, or would have segued into, what kind of specific examples of programs, policies, or even projects have been affected by the data specific to, do you identify of having a disability? And it stems more from a curiosity of how do you share that data throughout the entire organization, and how are people actually using it? Is it something that it's how you frame the statistics behind it, and then there's priority given to certain things? Or I'd just be curious, again, more on the specific programs, but I don't know if that's something you might know of, or if that'd be a question for a different person, I don't know.
Chair and community member, thanks for the question. The last time we did summaries of our onboard travel behavior inventory, we called out this 10% number, about 1 in 10 riders identified as having a disability, back pre-COVID, and did put that on our kind of main fact sheet that we sent to, the press and to public to understand who our ridership is. It's a really important component of that, along with, the race, ethnicity, demographics, and age distribution, things like that. So it was pretty prominent in how we were summarizing what we understand about our ridership. I'd say it was probably most used by our engineering facilities group, who do the, kind of the bus stop and transit center type design. And of course, they're always, thinking about universal access. But I think it was probably them that used the most the idea that, 1 in 10 of the riders pre-COVID identified as having a disability. And I'm using it as a baseline and thinking about, okay, now we're at a quarter or a third of people saying, maybe a half in some cases, that they identify as having one of these conditions. Well, that only makes it more important to do that work. So I can't point to a specific program that developed because we asked this question, but it's more just feeding into the motivation to keep doing this work. And in some cases, yes, look for money to do it.
I'd follow up with a comment.
And this is Ken.
Oh,
No, go ahead,
sorry.
finish up.
Thanks,
Go
Ken.
ahead.
I
Sorry,
think
Ken.
in the data that we just saw in this presentation from 2016 to 2021, there's a metric in there that you might be able to utilize, lead into, just to show the criticality of transit when it comes to the disability, people who identify as having a disability. I mean, you saw a reduction of 58% ridership of people that don't identify as such, even with the simple yes/no metric, and you're only seeing a reduction of half that essentially in the people who identify with disabilities. So I think that's just a really good point to show that transit, I think we all understand that, is critical to this community, but it's something that, it's just a little another nugget that I think can be shared to hopefully always instill or promote priority of, accessibility, universal design, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's good that you have that information, but you can always use statistics to tell a story, I think, and I think that's one that you can find in there that maybe can be promoted to those programs and policies and things like that. So appreciate what you do.
And Ken wanted to say something.
Thank you. Yeah, Ken was next, and then you're next, and then you can go on.
Yeah, and again, I just want to, the data that you presented with the increased number of representation on the survey from people that identify with some sort of disability makes total sense to me. I don't think it's unusual or a major increase than what we had before. I think the numbers we had before were diluted because there was such a normal, if I can use that term normal, I use that in air quotes here, but because there was a wider variety of a population base, that number of individuals that would surface as individuals identified with a disability was diluted. I think right now, with the lack of complete ridership that we had before, because many people are not commuting that don't need to, you're getting a more precise count. And again, I know you don't like the term transit dependent, but those of us that don't have other choices, we have to use public transportation. That doesn't mean that we don't want a clean, improved environment to be transported in, or that you shouldn't still continue to use this as a gauge to make sure that our transportation system is nice, clean, and something that people want to use just generally. I think it's just a use case that's being predicated upon people's needs right now. So, and 25% matches the actual number of people that we believe live with disabilities in our population today. So it matches. That's just everything makes sense. Nothing sticks out. There's no anything that's unusual about this. I think this snapshot is just more proof that you've got a good handle on analyzing who's writing, and so I think it just makes sense to me that these numbers make sense.
Go ahead. And Patsy, did you still have a question?
Well, I had two comments. One,
And then I have a follow-up or something I want to.
okay, one was about the, kind of like what Ken just alluded to again. I myself, because of my traumatic brain injury, and even prior to that being epileptic, I was not able to drive. And it will never be an issue of me being able to drive. So yes, I am 100% dependent on somebody.
Yep.
And I sure cannot keep asking a friend or neighbor. So when I lived at a different home, I was within the bus route. And it was before I was no longer able to use Metro, but anyhow, I was 100% dependent on taking the buses. So I don't know what you would call it, if we don't call it necessarily, dependent or whatever on the buses. But yes, I would have to say I am, and I'm sure there are many people. What the wording would be, I guess, I couldn't come up with what may be the best wording. I'm not really happy that I have to say that that's me, but that's the way that it is.
Thank you, Patsy. That's me too. Even though I can take a specialized van, or maybe I have private transportation from time to time, but I identify as being transit dependent. And that would be me too. That is the way I live my life, and I operate in the world that I operate in. I am transit dependent, whether it's 5 days a week, whether it's 1 day a week, whether it's 1 day a month. I'm transit dependent because I cannot jump in a car. I cannot jump in a taxi cab. I cannot jump on a train without some kind of assistance or some kind of, specialized service, right? The door has to be wide enough, or they have to give me a little extra time to load, or things like that. So to say that you don't want to capture that, for what reason? We haven't really heard a good reason why. I mean, yes, people have choices, but people identify the way they identify, and when they choose to identify as transit dependent, and then you don't capture that, or you don't want to capture that, that kind of is defeating the purpose of trying to be inclusive and trying to be operational for everybody, regardless whether it's 1 day a week or 7 days a week.
My only option, if I do not use the transit, is to be at home. And I chose to do that for several years when I did not have the ability to be able to use the bus, because it was realized that due to my head injury, it was unsafe for me to be on the regular route transit buses. So I have to use Metro. I cannot even go and take the train when I go to see the ball game without somebody with me, because the chance of me halfway along the way going, why am I here? What am I doing? Or there's a whole nother issue to it of my other past. But so I don't have an issue or a choice. It's stay home or go out.
And I want
The other thing that one moment.
I want to follow up with Darrell and her, because I was born not being able to drive at all. Because you have to have the processing to order to do it.
Patsy wasn't finished with her
were you
thought
finished?
yet. And then Angie's in queue, and then we're gonna try to wrap this up.
Okay.
The other comment that I had was about something that we were talking about earlier. FaceTime video. About this questioning. I am also on the Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Committee. And one of the things that we were working on a few years ago was the wording that the state assessments have. And they wanted to bring things down in numbers of questions. And they changed what was a bunch of questions into one. Do you have a disability? Well, that turned out being an issue, and we at the TBI Advisory Committee worked at making it be that you have to ask certain questions, such as an example we always used. If I was to ask somebody, if your sons or even yourself have had a head injury, no. But if I turn around and say, did you play sports when you were in high school? And Eric might say, yeah. Would you play football? Did you ever get tackled? And oh, yeah. And that leads to you saying, yeah, I guess I was. That's right. I was in the hospital for a week. I think I had a concussion. So anyhow, using just 1-2 words isn't going to catch it always. And a lot of times people don't want to title themselves as being disabled. So that being said, that's where I kind of see that we need to be very careful with the questions to include all people, but yet not too vague, too general.
Thank you, Patsy.
Yes.
Go ahead, Andy.
I think just to encapsulate one of the biggest pieces of feedback here, particularly when you get to the transit inventory, I heard a reason about shying away from the term transit dependent being at least implied that there has been the understanding that these people are always going to take the bus because they have to take the bus. So, you know, what might be needed to improve things for them, let's not worry about that. And I hear that you are very much trying to shy away from that. But I think what the committee is saying is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here, that the term transit dependent speaks to the importance of transit to the council's mission, and that for a large percentage of the community that transit is dependent upon, the same way that somebody is food dependent or water dependent or clean air dependent, that transit is the avenue to these other things, in addition to the avenue to all sorts of quality of life events and connections, et cetera. So I think it's just about maybe not throwing out that term or that recognition, but recognizing that it speaks not to the captive audience, but to the essential nature of the service we provide at the council.
Chair and committee members, thanks so much for this conversation around that term, which kind of sprung up, but actually is really important to me too. So I really appreciate that feedback.
And I have one thing, really quickly.
Real quick, and then we're gonna try to move forward
This is the
here.
first time I've ever heard you guys say that I can't use that word, because I've used it a lot in these meetings with other transit people that, you know, come and ask us about surveys and paperwork and anything to do with Metro Transit. And I say I'm dependent on Metro Transit because I was born not being able to drive. And you're the first to say, no, we're not going to use that. And it's like, well, I am dependent. You know, even Human Services would say, you know, when I
You're
read up on
transit
service, you're
dependent.
dependent.
They give you a county bus card that you use
Yes.
to get around, go to your services. She's transit dependent.
Dependent, yes. I've never had anybody say not to use the word. In all the years I've been on this committee, you're the first to say that that's like a bad word.
You said he wasn't capturing those people because
To me, it sounds
figured
like
those
you're
people were
denying
already
a whole big picture.
in the base
you know?
number of folks that you were capturing anyway, right? Is that kind of what I was hearing?
Chair, it is my own perspective on this, just that when we talk about our ridership as a whole, often our motivation and our, attention is on quote-unquote choice riders.
But you have to switch that kind of mind frame
I agree,
in your
totally.
mind, because
I agree,
you
totally.
cannot make the system better for choice riders unless you make it better for those that are dependent on the system.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that is what I was trying to get at in probably a really inartful way. But I think we're in total agreement, and I certainly am not going to
But that's
discourage
not how it
anyone from
came
saying
out.
they're transit dependent.
It's not a discouragement. Even in your response to me, it was like, well, we're not looking at that because we looked at that as a choice issue. Well, yes, they have a choice.
Time to move on.
Well,
Time to move on.
Thank you, Ken, for that suggestion. So would you like to move on to the next topic then, or are you finished, Eric?
There's more page, one
Do
more
you
page.
have a little bit more?
No, I think I've definitely got enough information today.
If you have more, let's go through it.
No, there was one more slide, was only the, what we've been talking about here, which is how the question might be revised and how we might be using this information as we go forward.
I think it's pretty obvious that there's a couple points on the surveys that you're not capturing at all, and there was reasons why you're not capturing those. And I think in order to make the survey more fluent and more applicable to our situation, and those that we represent. I think that would be important to add those questions and then try to recirculate and see what your responses might be.
Are they gonna bring it back to this table, or are they just going to do it on their own?
I would hope that you'd come back to visit us.
Chair, I'd be very happy to do so. And yes, if we're making changes to the questions, we'll recirculate them to you all for sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
And with that, if anybody, we have a couple other items. We have the 30th anniversary, and then also the driver recognition piece is what I think it got looped into one in our on our thing here. So I'm gonna do the driver recognition piece first, and I'm gonna ask Phil Sterner if you want to come up and you can hold the plaques as I mention the names. And then we'll make sure the plaques get out to the winners. But let me back up a little bit and do a little context of information, okay? Where do I start? Several years ago, when I was appointed to TAAC in 2000, under the Ventura administration, probably about 5 or so years after that, we used to bring a number of Metro Mobility drivers and transit operators to our committee, usually on a quarterly basis or every 6 months or so. And we would recognize them for their outstanding service and their outstanding commitment to Metro Transit and to serving the population that they serve. So what happened was over the last several years, several months, I was thinking, well, we should be bringing that back, right? What I know is that if we recognize our drivers, we recognize our transit operators, we recognize our receptionists, we recognize the people that keep our system going, we'll get more retaining work out of them. About 6 months to a year more work out of them if we recognize them a little bit. So what I wanted to do is recognize 5 particular individuals, and not to say I expect them to work for us a little bit harder now for the next year or so, but to say we really appreciate the work that they've done. We recognize the commitments that they've made to the population that they serve, and with that, I'll turn it over to Andy and see if Andy has any questions, and then I'll have Phil and I will present them, and then I would ask that the winners, if we'll get in contact with the winners after this, and I will ask the winners come back for our January meeting, if we so choose to have a January meeting. That's also up in the air right now. But I would ask them to come back for the January meeting. If we don't have a January meeting, then we can do it in February. But if we have a January meeting, I would ask them to come back, and they can bring their plaques back. We'll take a picture and put them in the newsletter. And again, that's that ongoing recognition that they so much deserve. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andy for a second.
So how are you gonna do that with their work schedule?
So how we gathered recipients is we just posed the question to customers. Did you have any particular transit worker that you felt provided exceptional performance and felt that you wanted to identify? We specifically put it out to riders with disabilities. And we do have recipients from each of our 4 primary contracts and 1 fixed route operator. I will point out specifically that though the agenda says driver recognition, it was actually open to all transit workers, and one of the recipients for our largest contract is actually a reservationist rather than an operator. But yeah, we, at least a couple of these folks are folks whom have gotten years of accolades from customers in passing, and some of the others are new, so that's exciting as well.
And yeah, I was very pleased to see the list. We did get a few names that came in, and I do think the selection that was chosen is well deserving. I mean, not to say that everybody who got nominated and the nominators, thank you for nominating them, because they all deserve the recognition. We just couldn't recognize all of them, otherwise we'd be here for the next couple of days for sure. So with that, I would like to recognize the five operators and reservationists that we did choose. And they do get a nice little plaque signed both by David Fenley, the chair, and myself, Darrell Paulsen, the vice chair. And it basically says, Certificate of Appreciation. The Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee formally recognizes, and then it mentions their name. So I'm just gonna mention the name, and maybe Phil, you can come and hold it up for me so they can see it at home as well, if you would like to. And then we will make sure that these get out to you. And then please, if you know these people and know these drivers or these reservationists, please reach out to them and ask them to come back to us either in January or February, and we'll reach out to them with details. So with that, I'll read it again. So the Certificate of Appreciation, the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee formally recognizes Histon Kulu for the outstanding service in the disability community through exceptional performance as a Metro Mobility operator, December 7th, 2022. And that's signed both by myself and the current chair, David Fenley. And then with that, the next certificate would be the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee formally recognizes Nicolay Montic for the outstanding service to the disability community through the exceptional performance as a Metro Mobility operator, signed and dated both by David Fenley and I, December 7th, 2022. The next one is Michael Owens. And Michael Owens is a reservationist. So the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee formally recognizes Michael Owens for the outstanding service to the disability community through the exceptional performance as a Metro Mobility reservationist, December 7th, 2022. Signed both by myself and David Fenley as the chair. And, well, no, we have one more after this that didn't get printed, but we'll print it. So, the next one is Richard Heller. How do you pronounce the middle name? Richard?
His last name is Herrera Cruz.
Herrera Cruz, for the outstanding service in the disability community through the exceptional performance as a Metro Mobility operator, December 7th, 2022. And it's both signed by myself and David Fenley as the chair. Phil Sterner also is our committee representative from the Met Council. He's been kind enough to hold up the plaques for us. Also, the next name I have, I don't know how to pronounce the last name.
Scott Shaler?
It would be a Scott Scheller, and I believe we're not sure what zone he's out of, but he is
Sounds like he drives fixed route.
he's a fixed route operator. So his certificate will be coming out as well. So congratulations to the 5 outstanding individuals that were recognized, and more importantly, congratulations to the disability community that nominated and that took the time to nominate somebody to be recognized in this outstanding work that we do here under the Met Council. So thank you to these operators, thank you to the reservationists, and thank you, Phil, for standing in, helping me out there. Thank you. So with that, that's my little piece of it. And then I would just like to pivot a little bit to the, well, it's the 30th anniversary of TAAC. What that means is it's been 30 years since TAAC has been formally mandated and been able and executed by the Metropolitan Council to operate and to advise them in an advisory role on transit issues. And over that 30 years, I have seen the committee do a number of things. I've seen the committee be real active. I've seen it go real dormant for a while. And then I've seen it be real active again. And I think my last 10 years of the council, and I've been here for a while, has been some of the most enjoyable, some of the most challenging, and some of the most learning things that I have ever done with you guys. And really, I worked with many of you guys outside of this committee in the community in different areas too, so I appreciate those relationships as well. So I want to say that even though we didn't come and create a formal presentation for the 30th anniversary of TAAC, it really is an ongoing work of this committee and what we do as this committee and what we do as citizens from the disability community in our communities, in our local environments. So even though we missed a formal deadline or a formal presentation for the 30th anniversary, I think what this really means is that we work together good as a group, right? We all come with our opinions and our suggestions and our own experiences, right? And because of those our own experiences and our own opinions and our own desires to make transit better, we actually do affect our leaders, right? We do affect people like Phil. We do affect people like the chair. We do affect people like Andy. We affect people like Allison. They sit here every day and they have to peer over things that we think about. And maybe we only think about them once a month or, when we come to our committee. But these guys have to think about them all the time. So it's important for us to recognize the work that we've done for 30 years. And let's do it again if I'm still around, let's do it again for another 30 years. I'm up for the challenge. I know there's only been a couple other folks that have been with the Met Council for a very long time. So I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be that one that gets to say, hey, we've done some pretty good stuff over the last 30 years, and let's build upon that. And I think we have a committee here today that will do that. And I think we have a staff that works with us and sits with us or stands with us in some cases beside us to get some work done. So I appreciate that. And with that, is there any questions? Otherwise, we can go on to committee reports. Or anybody online?
Nope, Ken's not there.
Okay.
Ken said I'm taking off. Darrell, you're talking.
I guess, Mr. Chair, I just had a
Go
thought.
ahead.
You had mentioned in the past with TAAC that driver recognition was kind of integrated every 6 months or something like that to appreciate the, the hardworking staff and drivers that make transit possible. Since I've been a part of TAAC, it's, I think, 3 years now. This was the first recognition ceremony, if we could call it that I've seen. And I think it's important to recognize those people. And I don't know how the rest of TAAC feels, but I would be curious or interested. I don't know how to get it out the ground, but maybe that would be a great annual thing where at the end of the year in December, at our December meeting, we take time to recognize those that make transit work and recognize them. So I, as an aside maybe to this ceremony, maybe it's a talking point for future meetings, but I would suggest that it's a good tradition, I think, probably to carry on, because it's, again, important, I think, to recognize those people. So, but with that, I'd leave that comment where it lies.
Thank you for that. I do want to recognize that there were other people on the committee that looked at this as well. I don't know how many of those people weighed in by the time I seen the list, so I do appreciate your response. One thing I did see that it was pretty, the ones that came in were pretty male dominated, so there wasn't a lot of there was diversity, right? So that's what we were looking for, right? We wanted to capture that diversity point of view, right? But there wasn't a lot of like female operation or that identifying space. So I don't know if recognized as much or if we don't recognize. I mean, some of the best drivers that I've had over the 30 years that I've been using transit are female operators. They're not male operators. So to see not many of them on the list. I don't even know if I've seen one on the list, but that was an interesting thought in my head, so.
I do have.
But yeah, I hope to keep, as long as I'm involved with TAAC, I hope to continue with the driver recognition piece of it. I think, given the fact that we know how quick we were able to turn around the certificates, I think we should be able to do it on an annual basis. I'll talk to the team, okay? We'll see what we can do, and then if we have to, we'll make a formal motion, and then we'll get them to do it with us.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Heidi.
My question is, and this might go back to Andy, I know we're at a shortage of drivers, but do we need to diversity, because I get a lot of men drivers that pick me up. Is there something we need to do to expand that so it's more diverse? You know what I mean? It's just something to think about, because I know in certain fields they've been looking at more ladies doing certain things and not just all men doing it, in certain fields. So it's maybe something we could talk about in the future, or the Metro Mobility Company can come up with some ideas, to expand it, because I don't really see a lot of ladies doing it, I mostly see men doing it. So maybe, to Darrell's point that he wishes, but then we also have to recruit in a way that they want to come to the table and be a part of it.
Well, don't forget, there's gonna be a, you can come either, January or February, when, you know, you'll be recognized again. Well, you know, the point is, I think we wanna recognize all of our operators throughout the year, not just once in a while, but for us to do it at least formally, maybe once a year.
But I was just bringing up, and then I think he wanted to say something.
Sure.
Well, Chair and Heidi, members of the committee, thank you. I think that's an important observation. We do know that operators are currently a male-dominated field, and certainly with regard to shortages, this is true, but it's also true from an equity standpoint all the time. It's important for us, even with contracted positions where the council is not doing direct hiring, to work with them and try to achieve more equitable results. You know, if you keep doing what you've always been doing, you're gonna keep getting what you've always gotten. And so we are working with our contractors to try to be more creative with their recruitment and with their retention. We know that there are some aspects of the job that could make it attractive to working women who disproportionately have to also head a household and deal with kids. So kind of trying to play up that flexibility in recruitment and utilize or advertise some of those aspects can certainly be something that helps us recruit women in addition to other underrepresented communities.
Did you have a lot of them when you answer the phone, but not out in the field? I don't see a lot of them, you know, like picking me up. I don't mind having a man pick me up. That's not the issue. The issue is that I haven't seen diversity of, you know, beyond picking up the phone.
Darrell?
I just wanted to bring that to your guys' attention, because I noticed a lot of ladies answer the phone and ask me about my rides and stuff.
You know, it's kind of ironic that the 30th anniversary of TAAC falls on Pearl Harbor Day. But the public needs to know that we have continued moving straight ahead. You know, we may get sidetracked at times, but TAAC has made things a lot better for people who are physically challenged and for our senior citizens.
Oh, yeah. We have a better building. I remember the old place, and now we have this place.
But our work
Talk about
continues,
moving up in the world.
It does.
and we don't get sidetracked, so.
It does. Well, with that, I'm gonna jump in here and just do the one question that I forgot that didn't get put on our agenda for some reason, or I didn't look at it well enough. But it was to bring us back to, the question that's posed to me is, do we wanna have a January meeting or not? Because typically we do not meet in January, because the first usually falls a couple days, or a day before or a day after. In this case, we're 2 days after the first, and that would be 1 day after session starts. So I'm asking my team to make sure that we bring back, Brooke or somebody on the legislative update, so they can give us their monthly update, and they already have their agenda set, so they should be able to give us a quick summary. So that for me is gonna be priority number 1 for January.
I think.
And then we'll do that. If any of our drivers come back or our reservation comes back, then we can have cake with them, take a little photo, and you'll invite the other council members. I don't know if we'll do a formal invitation, but you've got my formal invite. Now I'll work with Andy to make sure that we do that, and I'll make sure David's in the loop to do that as well. But
Mr. Chairman, I move that we do have a January meeting because it is the start of legislative session.
Yeah.
And they got $15 billion, and I think we can give them a few suggestions how to make transportation more accessible.
I absolutely agree with you, but I want the full committee to weigh in on this. and really understand that, that's also a challenging time for a lot of folks with weather and things like that.
That's why I made it in the form of a motion, so you can vote it up or down.
Yeah. So if it's a motion, then I'll need a second to that motion.
I'll second it.
And then now that we have a second, now that we can
Yeah,
have,
a second and a third.
now that we have a 30, but we can have a real discussion about it. And we can spend the time to have a discussion about it, but I also want to make sure that we capture anybody in the audience, if they have a question and they need to ask us a question or came for a public comment, to let me know. If you didn't, then we're fine.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
could I just ask for clarification on the motion? Is it for a meeting in January, or is it's for a meeting in January? Okay.
The motion was made that we have them, because of legislative session and because there's a ton of money on the table. Is that what I heard, Chris?
Yes, and I think we might,
There's almost $17 billion.
and we might have some suggestions for the legislature.
Yes. So if there's anybody on this side that wants to weigh in on the discussion as to opposed to for or against it, please let me know. I'm excited about having a meeting, but I can also entertain the reasons as to why we don't have to have a meeting as well. So
No, I think it would be great to have a meeting.
Yeah, just to add comment, I would be for the meeting. I don't know if we'll have a particular topic to lobby for funds, if that's the goal. I don't know how or if we can do that, but I know throughout the course of 2022, I think we had a couple unexpected cancellations, so making up that lost time, I think is warranted. I think we have, on my calendar at least, enough time from the first to that first Wednesday to facilitate, at least personally speaking, being able to make that meeting, so I'd be for it.
I do plan to be in town. I believe that's my mom's birthday that day. Is that January 4th, right? Is that what that is?
Yeah, it is January 4th.
So I'll be a little bit disshuffled, but I do plan to be here, and I did want to weigh in as well and say yes, I was for the meeting. I did think that the 2 unexpected cancellations that occurred over the last 12-month calendar, one of them did not definitely need to be occurred, and I was not consulted in that situation until it happened. We have a remedy to fix that in the future. So I do know that we have a 12-month calendar. We have a 12-month calendar of work to do, and I do think that if there are unexpected things that come up, staff and committee members can take off and have the right to do so. But I do think that we have enough on our plate for the next year or even 2 years to be meeting every month.
Is there anybody opposed to it?
Well, I've asked for people to be opposed to
I have a
it.
question over here.
And, okay, go ahead.
I just had a comment.
Yes.
Since we're talking about the legislative session, maybe Brooke would be a good person to
Right.
invite.
Well, yeah, we'll bring Brooke back or her boss back. And she'll be a standing committee
Is she back?
report on her.
Is she still doing it?
On her report, yes, she's
Okay.
still up there. I mean, we'll notify them that we want them to be on their schedule and we want to get on their schedule.
Yeah.
But they will give us the monthly update as they have in the past.
That's cool.
Mr. Chairman, I call the question.
All right, if there's not anybody opposed, then the question's been called. And it's been called. And so we're gonna call the question. All in favor of having a January meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Abstain, say abstain. It looks like we're having a January meeting. Thanks. Good job, guys and gals, and anybody else, however they identify. I'm talking to you, Murph Fox, back there in the audience there. That's my PCA, by the way. He identifies a little differently, so I wanted to make sure he was identified on the record correctly, so. And with that, we have committee reports. I have 2 committee reports to give, but we have Chris here as well. Do you have a?
No report.
You have no report for us. And we have Ken Rodgers,
He
but
left.
he's gone out of his
Off for
chair.
good. You lost him.
I think he took his dog out or something, it looks like. But with that, I will assume that he'll give us his report next month, because I know they were meeting last month, I thought, so. With that, I have a gold line update. As you can see, over the last several newsletters in Metropolitan Council and Metro Transit, they've been talking about the gold line update. We did break ground, as I mentioned,
Yeah, it was.
last month in Woodbury. But we're still getting a lot of traction because of that. And then the purple line, where I serve particularly as the TAAC representative. So I am going to tell you that as a TAAC representative, the purple line BRT project still exists. It's going through some tweaking and some challenges in a particular community, in my community of Maplewood, relating to some folks that they don't want it along a particular location or area. And so they're asking the city to kind of pull out of some support of it. But as a TAAC representative, I will tell you that they are doing community engagement. It will be starting, hopefully, if it hasn't already started. It should have started already, and it should go until the middle of January, I believe. Am I right on that, Phil? Or are you not?
I believe that's the case on that one, yeah.
Yeah, and then also I'll give you a more detailed report on that, because I'm going to another meeting in the community about the purple line right after I'm done here today, so I'll be able to give you more of an update.
I just was
if you
gonna
got
mention,
something,
it's
go
not
ahead.
on our agenda, but the D line opened last Saturday.
Oh, yeah, the D
In
line.
the news at the Mall of America.
Mall of America.
It was
over the Brooklyn
amazing.
Park.
I wasn't out there, but there was plenty of people out there. It was good.
It was very well publicized on the news, very well.
Good.
I forgot to mention it, because I wasn't there, of course.
Can I just say one thing with that? At the same time
Go
on the
ahead.
news, they said, well, the D line is opening up and we're happy for this, but at the same time, we're having some cuts. But in the next couple of years, we're going to do all these things. So how did that tie in or work or play into the picture? You know what I mean? There's a positive with a negative, that we don't have enough drivers. At the same time, we're gonna freshen up some of the stuff.
Okay, I could just maybe mention from my opinion only, but the D line replaced the local bus service, so it made it more efficient with better buses. So the operator numbers were the same, and we've been doing really good on recruiting. We could always do better, but we had about 100 drivers recruited over the last 6 weeks with a wage increase, going from about $22 up to $28. So once those drivers get up and running and we can retain their current drivers, the routes will, open up, but we still need more recruitment for our operators on all different levels. And when that goes in, then it should be that. But we want to make sure we're giving good service with good quality operators and not put too much strain on the operators while we're going through. But I know some people have suffered buses. I know one of my friends' daughter took the bus to school, and now that got cut this week. So that's going on. But I'm optimistic with the new operators in the pipeline that we'll have, service restoring pretty soon here.
Yeah, because that one lady said, when she was up on the podium, said that I used to use this one that wasn't as good, and now it's really good, and now she can use it more in her community, so that was really neat to hear, that she wasn't, lived in that neighborhood and understood it from the past.
Yeah, it looked
Vice
good.
Chair, just let you know, I was on the D line, or the D line yesterday, and I was impressed,
Well, thank you.
very impressed.
Yay.
I know their media blitz on that was amazing. They've done a lot of work on that.
Yeah, they did a really good job of reporting it, but then they also had to report the opposite end of it too. So,
Which was what? You said there was an opposite end of that. What was the
that was
opposite
the,
piece?
where they had to do cuts.
Oh, okay.
And there were going to be service cuts, and that got me thinking, going back to, are we going to have problems, because Metro Mobility is kind of tied into that. Are we still going to be able to go to some of these major medical places, by bus and, and Metro Mobility?
So if we could stop here and take those rest of
Take
this
that note
offline,
back and,
then let's kind of do a couple other comments, a couple other questions. Go ahead, Andy.
Two things before we adjourn today. One, you should have gotten an email. The council received an external request to take part in an evaluation of emergency services availability for people with disabilities. And one of the things they are looking at is the development of a task force. So specifically, we wanted to see whether you or any other members of the disability community with whom you interact might be interested in being a part of such a task force.
Is this a statewide task force or a
timing-
federal task force?
I believe that it's a statewide initiative or in fact, region-wide for our particular region for the purposes of this. But it's sooner rather than later, so please check out that email that was sent, or if you do better with hard copies, there are hard copies at the table outside if you didn't already grab one. Secondly, just a reminder, if you represent A through D or are the chair of this committee, you got an email reminding you that your term is up in January and you should reapply if you want to continue to serve on the committee. None of the incumbents have yet applied, so if you are interested in doing so, and again, represent A through D or are the chair, then please do so.
A through D. So,
As
like,
the vice
people
chair,
like
I'm safe still, but
Minnesota CCD is not, right?
No, you're not, no, you don't represent an area.
Okay. I just had to ask that because rules might
let's say I
change.
lost, could he still
Mr.
serve
Chairman?
as chair?
Mr. Chairman? Darrell?
Go ahead, sorry,
I
Chris.
have a suggestion. We have not heard from Transit Team or First Transit for a few years. At some point on our calendar this year, can we get those people in here?
I believe we can, Andy. We can get them in here, can't we?
Yep, I assume you mean for next year?
For this, yeah, 2023.
Yep.
Yep. And what we can do with that, and I have talked to our chair about this as early as yesterday, is that I want to see us bring back our 12-month calendar and kind of lay that out
Yeah.
in a 12-month cycle. And then also if the committee or the council has projects that they need us to weigh in on or be okay with, they can sprinkle those through our 12-month calendar as they need to be, right? Because that can be a fluid calendar. But I think if we all look at what we do in the 12-month calendar, I think we'll be a lot more focused. And
You mean
we'll
like in the
actually
beginning of the
We'll
year?
actually see the positive impacts that we're making in the community if we're looking at that.
So, can I recommend something? Do
Go
we
ahead.
get a calendar of what's going on every month so we can kind of base it around it? We've never gotten a calendar that says in July or in April or in January.
Like an activities calendar? I mean,
Yeah, like knowing-
I don't know that we could do that because everybody's choices are different. in
No,
activities.
once we got it, the 12 months,
Oh, you
all
mean once we
scheduled
get the
out.
12 months, then can we get that pushed out to our,
And
to our,
then can we
to our
have, I was
committee?
just
Yeah.
wondering if, because we never had a calendar of looking at what you're talking about. We just kind of know from month to month, kind of close to the actual meeting.
Yeah. Well,
I've never known ahead of time.
we can talk about that. I know we've done that we've done that before. We usually spend 2 or 3 meetings doing that, so that takes up almost a quarter of our year when we do that. But, I mean, if we can pull that back out, Allison, you know what you know what I'm talking about, right? Our 12-month timeline that we look at, and we say, okay, these are the things that we've done, these are the things that we identify. And, you know, usually we have, you know, we identify the legislative update, that's on the calendar as long as the legislature's in session. But then we identify, like, the state fair usually hits us sometime in July or the beginning of August.
End of August.
Yeah, they need to come hit us a little bit earlier than that, like in May would be nice. Cause we know that they have little changes in their system, but if they started talking to us in May, it would greatly improve. I know Ken is back in. I hope Ken, you didn't miss too much other than we were weighing in on whether or not we had a January meeting or not. Hopefully you can make it because we voted to have a January meeting with or without you. But I also wanted to loop you into like Heidi's point or to other people's point. I'm looking at bringing back the 12-month calendar that we used to look at, our timeline of things that we used to do throughout the year, so that we can focus on some of those things and we can look at what accomplishments we have done throughout the year. And I know, like I asked Allison if she remembered it, she wasn't quite sure about it. I do know we've done it a couple different times, but like I said to, is it Richard? Eric, like I said to Eric's point, it takes about a quarter of our time or our year to get through it. So I'm wondering if we can just do a fast version.
Are you where?
On my desk.
Okay.
But that was my opinion, but I hear your point very
I
taken.
just thought you were talking about the 12-month thing, and we really don't know half the time what's going on until close to the meeting.
Sure.
And we sometimes can be a little bit more prepared, for certain things,
Right.
And Allison does her job, the best she can, and it's great, she sends it out ahead of time, but we've never had the way you were talking.
Well, maybe we can talk about that. Maybe we can change that internally. We'll see. Anybody else? We're over our time now.
No.
So I want to respect everybody's time, including the staff's time.
Could I, Mr. Chair, just add
Yeah,
one thing?
Darrell, I just want to briefly say, I think the question or issue looking at the 12-month calendar, I think that should be an executive committee decision. So you and Chair Fenley should discuss that and bring it forward to us. That's really the detail that you guys should handle and then tell us what's
Sure.
going to transpire.
Okay, that makes sense. Go ahead. Eric.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was going to wait for member comment. I think we're going to be wrapping up here soon. I just wanted to recommend that maybe for future meetings, since we're having them back in person, is it possible to have some sort of name tag or placard back up for presenters who might
yeah,
want
we
to
used to have
identify?
that.
All that's a good point. That bring back some continuity, some visibility to
Yeah, because we used to
And
have.
for members to identify members, sometimes we might,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, because
110%
I'm bad
with
with
face.
that too, Eric. I'm like, hey, come on.
And
give me
the
his
other,
name.
the other comment I just wanted to make is, we do have a semi-hybrid or a hybrid mixture of being in person and then having I don't know if that's Zoom or Teams. There's a portion in the Teams or the online application where you can chat. And those, I think, are some opportunities for people to communicate with us if they are at home. I don't think anyone in the council chamber here can really read or see what's being said. I just wanted to identify that issue. I don't know if that's something somehow we need to shore up as far as if someone has something to say in chat that is either identified by a moderator, that there's a question. But then also just for transparency, we can see what's being chatted from the other side. So if it goes to everyone or it goes to a particular member, just from what I can see here, I think we can all actually see that. So
Right, and are
two
we-
issues on that front I just wanted to bring up.
Thank you.
Vice Chair,
Anything else? Otherwise, I'm moving for adjournment.
I'd like to see a topic coming up next year about the website for Metro Mobility.
Oh,
We've been talking about it for so long, and we still see a lot of problems on the website. So I'd like to see an update on that.
and then,
Thank you.
and then the other thing, can I bring up really quickly? And to her point, I was on Metro Mobility coming here, and the ranger for one of the drivers misspoke. So are they still working on updating it and keeping it fresh? And can he bring back some reports? Because we have talked about getting that,
Yep, well,
resolved,
both of those are Andy questions, I believe. And I'll talk to Andy about that.
Yeah, because we're still struggling to, and today was not a good day to screw up.
Well, thank you. If the public has comments or if they don't, say it now, otherwise I move to adjourn. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.